Hello, and welcome to Maggie's first ever solo episode. Talking about, we're going to talk about Pride and Prejudice, the 2000 whatever movie with Keira Knightley.
2005.
Yeah. But
this is going to be the episode where Cam doesn't talk and I just yell about how great this movie is.
We rewatched the movie a couple days ago, and we didn't even think about doing it on the show.
No, not at all.
It was just because it's one of Maggie's favorite movies.
Yep. It's my absolute number one favorite movie.
And it made me realize we don't really cover our favorite things. Like, I know we did the original Evil Dead last Halloween, but we don't really do episodes on our favorites. And I think it's because it's really hard, for me at least, to talk about things that I love so much. Like, it would be very difficult to do an episode on The Witch.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Because I'm so immersed in it. I have such affection for that movie. It's in my probably top 3 of all time.
Well, and we've talked about it so much already that it's like we could splice together every moment we've said about it and then just make one episode.
Yeah, but I don't even know how I would put notes together because it's hard to zoom out or pick it apart, or some things I don't want to look at analytically. Sometimes I just want to enjoy them.
Yes, yeah. When I was putting together my notes for this, I was like, well, I can't bring any sort of objectivity to this because I have so much attachment to this movie, and so many of the reasons for me liking it are personal and subjective and nostalgic, and I'm just attached to the movie. So I tried to focus more on the idea of it as an adaptation. I thought we could kind of talk about it in that degree rather than just talking about this movie is beautiful, because duh.
Because it's sort of doubly difficult for you because it's your favorite movie and your favorite book.
Yes.
Which, like, I don't know if that makes it harder or easier for you to love the movie, but I'm sure they are connected in your mind forever now.
They are. I've got a lot to say about that. We can get into it.
I mean, I've read the book. I've seen the movie now because of you, many more times than I've read the book.
I'm not going to apologize.
But it feels like such a great adaptation that I struggle to experience either the book or the movie individually.
Yes, me too. I never will be able to at this point. They're so intertwined for me, and I recognize the distinctions, but it's a universal experience now.
Which is the same way I feel about Lord of the Rings.
Exactly. Yeah, it's very hard for me to separate the movies now when I'm reading them, obviously. And then vice versa, when we go back and watch the movies, I'm constantly making comparisons to the book. So it makes a lot of sense.
Great. Yeah, so I've got some points, but I'll just sprinkle them in occasionally.
Great.
Take us away.
Great. Well, so again, to start, we're talking about the 2005 Joe Wright Pride and Prejudice, starring Keira Knightley and Matthew Macfadyen, who now stars in Succession. It was the weirdest thing seeing him in Succession for the first time, because he is American and an absolute asshole, which is not at all what Darcy's kind of a dick, but like in a really, really different way.
One of my points is about the similarities between those characters.
Yeah, I mean, there are crossovers for sure, but
the
it's very funny.
Is the weirdest part.
He's got an awful haircut
to
in this
go
movie.
Like a mullet to buzz cut.
Yeah, his haircut is bad. I mean, I don't know how period accurate it is. I know they tended to have pretty shaggy hair unless they were like in the military or something, but
the accent's a big change too.
Yes, that's what's so big about it. And you could just never picture Tom doing a lot of the things that Darcy does, and vice versa. Anyway, this is just an ad for Succession. Go watch Succession.
It did make our best of 2021 episode, which was last Tuesday. Go listen to that too.
It did. Succession did. So to prepare, Cam kind of gave me a couple of questions just to think about beforehand, because he was interested in hearing certain opinions and perspectives from me.
I am a guest at this party.
Yes. So your first question, or the first question I chose to address, is just the simplest one, which is, why is this your favorite movie? And again, I recognize I am bringing an immense amount of subjectivity to this. Like, this is a personal opinion. I'm going to always say it's the best movie ever made, but I recognize that that's not everybody's opinion, and that's fine, but I'll still fight you on it. Okay. So it's highly rewatchable, number one. It's incredibly comforting. It's beautiful. It's happy, and it's sad, and it's devastating, and it's escapist, and it's old-timey England, which I love. Like, it's all the things I love. And, you know, like every good romance, you know they're going to get together in the end, but the tension and the conflict and the complications and all the nuance that are all the way through the story make it interesting and engaging and delightful to watch every time. Because obviously, after you've seen it once or read it once, you know what happens. So you're not watching for plot at that point. You're just watching for all the other stuff in between. And it's actually a very dense film, which is why it's so fun to rewatch. Like every time I rewatch it, I catch something new, like a costume choice or something. Like I was noticing the other day, when we were watching, the Bennets are not very rich. Lizzie Bennet, their family is not very rich. They are still like they still have servants and stuff. Like they're not working class by any means. They have an estate, they have servants in their home, but they don't have a ton of money. And I think Joe Wright and the other, I'm just going to, like we say with Peter Jackson, Joe Wright is the name of the filmmakers, but obviously there are a million people involved in
Did he have a hand in writing the adaptation?
That is a great question that I don't know the answer to. You know, I really should know that. I think, no, I don't think so. I think it's some other dude, but honestly, not sure.
Because I feel comfortable using Peter Jackson as the catch-all because he was also
involved
one of
in
the writers.
Writing. Yeah.
But just say the creative team.
Yeah, the creative team, right. So, they made an effort to show that the Bennets are not super wealthy. Like their house is really messy and the characters rewear.
It's the most beautiful house I've ever seen. But
it's beautiful.
I guess there are hats put in places.
I mean, that first shot when you pan into their house, there are clothes all over the place. The furniture's all disorganized. Like they're like a messy, not super wealthy family.
Well, yeah, it's a lot of daughters.
Right, exactly. Thank you, Cam, for that bout of sexism.
How many sisters do you have?
2. We'll get into that.
I saw your childhood bathroom.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
Messy.
Okay, so my point is, they have the characters rewear clothes. Like Lizzie, at one point when she goes to that first ball, just in town, where they meet Mr. Darcy and Mr. Bingley, Lizzie's wearing a green dress. Later on, when she goes to visit Charlotte and Mr. Collins at their
Netherfield?
Nope. At their place right next to Rosings Park, which is where Lady Catherine lives. They're going to go see Lady Catherine, and Mr. Collins is like, wear your best dress, like, because you have to look really nice. And Lizzie wears that same green dress. Like, that's like the one nice dress she owns. And so like there's a real effort made to display those little things like that, which I think are really cool. So that's fun to always catch when you rewatch.
It's also efficient characterization.
Totally.
Because those are things you could hit in narration in a book.
Exactly.
But it almost has more impact if you notice it on your own in a movie.
And I'm going to get into this more, but this specific movie, when I'm talking about adaptation, this specific movie does so many things that are not directly on the page in Jane Austen's book, but they are accomplishing the same characterizations and descriptions in different ways, and it's still giving the same message. And I'll talk more about that later. But yeah, it's very rewatchable. You catch a lot of things. And again, the sister thing, right? So like this story features a family of 5 sisters. And I have 2 sisters, so it's not quite the same. But I connected to this a lot growing up because I was in this family of sisters, and like I watched this a lot with my mom and my sisters some a lot growing up. So I'm just attached to it in that way. My family isn't really like the Bennets, like especially my mom. I don't ever want to insinuate that my mom is like Mrs. Bennet, because she's not at all. But in many ways, our family is like theirs, just being kind of disorganized. We weren't super wealthy growing up. Like it's a lot of things like that. And again, I'm attached to this. Like I first saw this movie when I was 13, and I have like distinct memories of watching this like with my group of like middle school girlfriends who I'm still friends with now. Like I have memories of like being at one of their houses and we're all like throwing popcorn at the screen, like screaming at Mr. Darcy to kiss Elizabeth when he proposes to her. And it's like, it's so cute. So I just remember doing that. We used some of the music in our wedding ceremony.
Who?
You and I remember that time we got married. And so, yeah, I'm really attached to this movie, and it does so many things so beautifully. And we can get into that in a little bit, but that's just kind of why I'm attached to it. I suppose the next question that you asked me was, please feel free to interject anytime. Otherwise, I'm not going to pause. I just want you to know
that's
that.
Fine. No.
Another question that you asked me was, like, what did you see first? Book? Like, did you see the movie first? Did you read the book first? And how did one shape the other? So I saw the movie first.
Interesting. Okay.
Which I don't normally like to do. But I was probably about 13 at the time. Didn't have a whole lot of interest in reading 19th century literature.
Yeah,
like,
sure.
I liked to read. I liked, books I read for English class and stuff. But I was like, that book is too hard. I don't want to read that. But I just randomly saw this movie, like kind of accidentally. I don't remember how, but I just saw it accidentally. And so I didn't end up reading the book until like much later in high school. And so when I first saw the movie, there was a ton that I did not get. Again, I'm 13. I was pretty dumb until like 2 months ago. We've discussed this. I was pretty dumb for a long time.
That's
I did well in school and whatever, but like I was dumb. Okay.
No.
And so like, and you've seen this movie, the dialogue is pulled from the book. So like they don't try to dumb down much of the dialogue. It's like that early 19th century dialogue, which can be really hard to understand. And I also didn't understand a lot of like historical and social context of things going on. So
the etiquette, the norms.
Yeah, like a lot of that was like, I didn't really understand what was going on and I missed a lot of points, but I understood the main thread, the central things that were happening. And so I was interested enough to keep watching and to rewatch and to rewatch and rewatch. And so over time, every time I watched it, I understood a little bit more about what was going on. And I feel like this movie sort of like trained me to learn how to understand old-timey English, which is how it felt to me when I was, a teenager. And that I think kind of built my foundation for reading older classic literature and like understanding that complex, multi-phrase dialogue and stuff like that. And so then by the time I finally did read the book, which was later in high school, being so familiar with the movie by that point helped me when I read the book. Because again, a lot of the dialogue is taken straight from the book. So I was like, oh, and like there are so many characters and place names and there are extra characters in the book that don't make it into the movie. So just like, but having faces to attach to a lot of these characters was really helpful for me. And like, even like I would read a line of dialogue that wasn't quite the same as the movie, but I remembered the one from the movie and I was like, oh, that's basically the basic message of this. And so I understood it. And so it was actually really, really helpful for me.
And like you're not going to get lost. It's a book outside of your comfort zone, but if you already know the shape of the story, you'll probably be fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I feel that way too.
Yeah.
I used to do that sometimes with like a new Shakespeare play or something that I didn't have any bearing on. I would read like a summary of what happens in the scene, just so I knew the nuts and bolts of the plot, and then I could catch more in the moment. Of the dialogue, reading the footnotes for all the historical references, sort of the same principle.
Yeah, exactly. And I will say, like, I think I read this book for school my senior year of high school. And before that, I'd read some other like 19th century literature. Like I read Frankenstein in like freshman year of high school and well, Shakespeare's not 19th century, but I read old stuff, right? But I honestly feel like the first time I really understood a book that was like pre-20th century for school was Pride and Prejudice, because I was dumb. I was so familiar with the movie and even the Shakespeare stuff I'm not even including really, because I had no fear Shakespeare like you were talking about. I had summaries, so I had help. Like Frankenstein, when I read that when I was 14, I had no idea what was going on. Like, why did they make us read that in high school? I was too stupid to know.
I got a lot out of Frankenstein.
I was 14. I was so dumb. I had no idea what was going on. I was so bored,
Well, I just meant because that one, unlike something like Shakespeare, Frankenstein's not really full of references to like Roman history and things.
Right, but it wasn't even that. It was just I found it inaccessible when I was that young.
See, I think because most of it is that sort of confessional first person sort of angle.
Yeah.
I felt that it was more accessible.
We get it. You're smarter than me. We can
I'm so on every measurable metric, I'm less smart than you.
It's really not true at all.
Frankenstein actually, I might have seen a couple movie, like the old black and white horror ones.
I hadn't. So I was
maybe
just
that gave me better.
All I knew was Boris Karloff. So I just didn't know anything. But anyway, point is I felt like I really understood what was going on. And I think my experience in reading the book was helped by my English teacher, who was a huge fan. Her name was Mrs. Dupree. She was a huge fan of Pride and Prejudice, and she had us watch the 1995 miniseries in class while we were reading the book. And she was like adamant that was the best adaptation of the book. And in many ways it is. Like, if you add a level of objectivity, it is more accurate to the book. It's a lot more subtle, because that's something I struggled with when I first read the book. Was this is not nearly as subtle and dramatic as the movie. And that's a big criticism of the 2005 movie, is that it's overly romantic. And I mean that with a lowercase and uppercase R. Like, it's overly romantic. It's more dramatic. It isn't true to the like subtle nature of the dialogue and the circumstances and the plot that's happening in the novel. And the miniseries is more true to that. But I don't like that.
Right. And is it a better movie or show? Is it more fun to watch?
Right. And I think what's important to consider here with this idea of like adaptation and subtlety and drama and romance is time period and context, because if you think about Jane Austen, she started writing Pride and Prejudice back in the 1790s, I think. Back then, the book was called First Impressions, and then she made a lot of changes, and it was published in like 1812, 13, something like that. But so, you know, this is right at the very beginning of the Romantic era, when you have your Mary Shelleys, your Lord Byrons, your William Blakes, your Walter Scotts. I'm using British authors intentionally because we're talking about Britain here. And that's when you get all that, like, the drama that you associate with the 19th century of, like, sweeping landscapes, beautiful romantic things, like dramatic dying for your lover, all that stuff. Like, that is just when that's about to begin. And so Jane Austen is writing, you know, she died in like 1814. So she really didn't experience full-fledged romanticism. And so she's either not very exposed to romanticism, it's not very popular with her readers, or she's not interested. Either way, she's not engaging with that. Her books are very subtle. Like, she's very funny and dramatic things happen, but it's written in such a subtle way.
It's very dry.
Right. But contemporary readers of her time who are reading the books when they're coming out.
I don't mean the books are boring. I meant the humor is dry.
Yes.
Just to clarify. Okay. Yeah.
You're a fan of the books.
The book's great. Yeah.
Which books have you read of hers?
Just that one, I think.
Oh, well, you should read more because they're great.
Yeah.
Okay. Read Northanger Abbey. It's short and really funny.
I'll see the movie when it comes out.
Anyway, so readers at the time would have picked up on how dramatic and intense and funny a lot of these moments are. It wouldn't have felt subtle to them, right? Because we're used to 21st century sensibilities where things are really dramatic. They have to punch you in the face to even make the smallest impact. And even this movie, which was made 16 years ago, it's still, you know, we're in the 21st century. We need the Matrix to be excited, right? And so,
in the same way, like, Shakespeare wasn't stuffy at the time. It was as lowbrow as humanly possible.
Exactly. So if you put it in that context, Jane Austen's really not that subtle. Like, her plot is not that subtle. Her character's not that subtle. It's clever and thoughtful, and it's not in your face. And I'm never going to say that it is, but contemporary readers would not have found it, like, dry in a bad way or, like, boring. And so what the 1995 miniseries adaptation does is it doesn't add anything that's not there for the most part. Like, the best example to compare these two adaptations is Darcy's First Proposal. So in the book, Mr. Darcy proposes to Elizabeth inside Mr. Collins's and what's her name? Charlotte's home. It's like in a living room. They, like, argue. There's no yelling, at least not. It's not said on the page that anybody yells, but there's an argument, and then Mr. Darcy leaves. Right. In the miniseries, that's exactly what happens. They are sitting down. Actually, I think Lizzie is sitting. Darcy is standing. They're in a room. He proposes. She says no. They have a angry discussion, but there's no yelling. And then Mr. Darcy leaves. In the 2005 movie, they are outside in the rain under this, like, beautiful, like Greek columned pergola, and it's raining, and they're shouting, and, like, it's very dramatic, and there's sweeping music, and none of that stuff is in the book. None of that's on the page, but the feeling and the vibe and the sensation is all there. And so basically why I like this movie so much is Joe Wright is taking the stuff that exists there, and it's all the same dialogue. Like, the dialogue is very minorly edited. It's almost the exact same dialogue, but he's taking it and applying it through a 21st century lens, and is using that cinematic language to convey those same feelings, and it makes it relatable to a 21st century audience rather than an early 19th century audience.
Well, I mean, we've talked about that 100 times with Macbeth most recently, with Lord of the Rings constantly. But the work of adaptation is not linear. It's not one-to-one. It is most often changing things, but shooting for the spirit of the original text more than the exact wording, more than the exact description in the narration. It is more ethereal, which also means it can go wrong to the viewer because everyone's reading the text differently. Never mind how those interpretations are translated onto a screen. And I have a point, actually, about the sort of spirit of the book.
Yeah.
That, I mean, I've read this book in college, so I had, I don't know, I guess a more refined palate for books. I wasn't, 14 stumbling through it. And one of my favorite parts of the book, just structurally, is the short chapters. Because it's not a very long book. It's sort
really
of
not.
a perfect length for me.
It's not short, but it's not long.
But it's like 80 short chapters. And you can't have that many like ad breaks in a movie where it fades to black, or it'd be ridiculous.
Right.
But the movie is punchy in a way that captures some of that terse, quick pacing, because it's not really a series of scenes in a movie. Almost like Succession, actually. It's a series of events, isolated events, like, oh, we have to go to a ball now, or I mean, there are probably a dozen like surprise home visits or visits to other people's homes, little trips that people take.
It's a lot of going to other homes. Yeah.
And it is sort of mercilessly edited in a great way, where it does go from event to event, and there's not that much downtime in between. There are a couple scenes where you process like a proposal or something with two characters at night before they go to bed. But most of it is the events themselves. And the next time you see Darcy is the next time, oh, we're visiting his house. And poof, he shows up there. So it does capture for me that sort of terse, biting punchiness of the book. But the color palette is unbelievable.
It's beautiful.
I mean, it's probably the most beautiful movie I've seen. And
there's never going to be a more beautiful movie.
I haven't seen that miniseries because it looks ugly compared to this one.
It totally does.
It is. I mean, it's all like doily colors.
Like, it's way more historically accurate. A big difference is that Joe Wright places this in the 1790s, literally because he thought the dress styles were ugly in the Regency era.
But that's what I want from an adaptation.
Right. Like, Empire waist dresses make everybody look pregnant. They're not very cute. So he went for the better dresses. I'm like, all right.
The costumes
that's a
look
choice.
more fuddy-duddy in the miniseries to me. The color palette is so limited and bland, like airport hangar sort of colors. Versus the Joe Wright version, which has this unfathomable pastoral beauty in every single scene. And I think we're in the middle of such a cynical time for movies and art in general, where anytime there's something nice, it's only the balloon to be popped later. And I love that the beauty of this movie isn't a punchline. It's not something that is spoiled later on in the movie as we get to like the real story where we see like the muddy slums of London and it's, oh shucks, that's how the other half live. Like, it's not that. You have to accept that this is the setting of the story. These people live in Dante's highest heaven.
Like, we see the maid walking around singing happily to herself, and that's the most we get of any other class.
And once you accept that and you stop waiting for it to change or become a point of commentary, it almost makes a stronger case for the drama of the story. The universality of these social dilemmas, of the family drama. It's a great trick. And it becomes like a structural commentary because there's no dialogue pointing to that. Like, oh, everyone has problems with they're kind of splitting their parents and who's going to be on my side in this fight and how do I politic that later. It's about that being present everywhere. Even in the prettiest places, even in the most sprawling marble statue filled mansions.
Like Darcy has the most beautiful home ever to exist, and he's miserable and socially awkward.
And it strangely, it makes the conflicts more human and universal, even as they get more and more elevated till you're sitting with Judi Dench, who's basically the queen. And it still feels accessible and universal. It's a really cool little magic trick in this movie.
And I think, going back to the idea of like capturing the spirit of the book, I think the 2020 Emma adaptation does a lot of the same thing. The 2020 Emma adaptation has been criticized for being a bit over the top in its humor, in its costuming, in its set design. Like, they use too bright colors, too ridiculous dialogue, too ridiculous hairstyles. Like, they really overdo it. But I think that's very clever because that novel is so funny. And again, it is more technically subtle. Like, there's nothing on the page that says like Emma is like, you know, sitting up on a windowsill, like looking out over through the window and like being, you know, bitchy about stuff. And there's nothing about Mrs. Elton having an absurd hairstyle, but like that sense is still there. And so it captures that really beautifully. Like, the movie is borderline like caricaturistic or like satirical in the way that it plays with the humor, but I think that captures the spirit of the book so much better. And again, it's putting it in 21st century language.
Oh yeah, it's playing to the audience. I mean,
Yes.
it's that movie, the Emma, which is also fantastic.
It is fantastic.
The director primarily does music videos, and it has that quick, energetic sensibility
Yes.
where it's constantly holding your attention. The jokes are dense. I mean, the source material seems like it captures
the book
heart
is like
of
that. Yeah.
but it has this snappy, surreal rainbow quality to it that is super engaging and also makes it distinct from Pride and Prejudice, which has
Yes.
become, I mean, I think to most people, the benchmark of Jane Austen adaptations.
Yes, that's the thing, is that in many ways, the Emma adaptation is more true to Jane Austen's work, like in its humor, in its sort of making fun of itself and its characters and not taking itself too seriously, whereas the Joe Wright movie takes itself incredibly seriously. But they're just different, and they both capture really great essences of both these novels, and I think that's why they're so good.
The one moment that reminds me of the Emma version, kind of viewing them backwards, that I noticed in this rewatch of Pride and Prejudice is all the quick zooms.
Yes,
Because
he does love a quick zoom.
in between all that like pastoral, highfalutin beauty, you have these quick zooms always onto surprised faces.
Yeah.
And it feels, I mean, compared to the tone of the rest of the movie, it feels rude or jerky,
It does.
much like that emotion of being suddenly surprised
Yes.
or shocked or scandalized.
Well, because so much about like British Regency society is like not being inappropriate, is like being respectful and reserved and not
Repressive.
showing. Because, and that's the whole thing with the Bennet family, is that the sisters and Mrs. Bennet are over the top and are inappropriate and are not reserved. And that's like Darcy's huge critique of their whole family and why you have this conflict. And so him to bring that out in that way is really interesting.
Yeah, because I mean, the characterization constantly sets that standard for how reserved these people are. At one point, Elizabeth talks about her sister Jane always being so quiet and careful with her feelings, and that she barely even sees her like real emotions.
Yes, so she goes too far, and that causes Darcy to question her actual interest in Mr. Bingley romantically, and he thinks that she's just doing it for the money.
And even our main character, Lizzie, whenever there's a family shot, she's off to the side or hidden in the back with a book. So she's not this, like, she doesn't have main character moments as much
right.
as like every American movie I've ever seen.
Yes, right. Like Lydia, the youngest sister, is very much an American heroine, and then like Jane and Lizzie are very much these British heroines. It's very interesting.
And there is this sort of main character moment for Mr. Bennet when he sort of sides with Lizzie against her marrying Mr. Collins.
I love that moment.
Later on, he takes the other side on different issues. He's not this like hero antidote to his neurotic wife. He's sometimes an ally and sometimes not.
Yes.
And he'll fade to the background quickly.
And that's the beauty of Jane Austen's characters, that they're all so nuanced and so real and recognizable. They're not archetypes. They're actual people, and you recognize people that you know in your life in them. And again, that speaks to just the absolute relevance of Jane Austen's work, is that it is translatable and applicable and relatable in almost any time and space context, I feel,
And
much
not-
like Shakespeare.
Like, it's not condescending. There's a confidence in not having to explain everything. And sometimes your subconscious will accept something or feel satisfied by the outcome of a story, even if it hasn't been perfectly articulated at you on screen. Like, I mean, we've sort of made this joke before, but movies where it opens with the hero swimming. So you know in the climax of the movie, they'll need to swim to escape the zombie.
Yeah.
Like that sort of 2 + 2 = 4 kind of boring structure.
Yeah.
I was thinking about Darcy's arc being sort of the other lead of the movie. We haven't talked about that much.
Yeah.
His fundamental issue, which I guess sparks his character arc for the movie, is his lack of social ability.
Yeah.
In the beginning. And I've seen this movie a bunch of times, and only the other day when we rewatched it did I realize that he completes that arc by intricately politicking Jane and Lydia's situations and fixing all of that behind the scenes, which requires a deft amount of social ability.
Yes.
So he's sort of proved himself and solved that problem while also solving his judgment problem and correcting his initial classism towards the Bennet family.
Right, yeah.
But almost all of that, there are actions he takes that demonstrates a change, but it's not specifically articulated at you. So you get to put it together, or you get to just feel better about him.
Right.
I like the confidence of that.
I totally agree. You also see him doing that with when they're visiting Derbyshire, and he's like being really nice and friendly to the aunt and uncle, and he's like, come fishing with me, Mr. what's his name, and stuff like that. Like you see him like completely like trying to turn around and making a social effort, and you can still kind of see and recognize the strain it's having on him, but he's doing such a great job, and
but
it's wonderful.
Just doing the thing, just demonstrating the point instead of making the point. I think that sort of idea comes in from some of the first shots of the movie when you get these long, slow tracking shots through the Bennett house. And you get that later in a ballroom where you see how most of the characters are acting during the ball and where they are and who they're talking to. And I love those, not just because they're impressive on like a technical level, but they also establish a sense of place like nothing else can in a movie. The first one at the Bennett house is sort of my favorite because it shows you the scale of the house. I mean, you get a feeling of walking through it. It's not just the camera plonked down, pointing at different corners of it.
No, it feels like you're walking through it for the first time because it goes slowly. So you're like looking around at this new place. You're literally being introduced. It's very cool.
And you see the characters living in their house. You see where people sit in their little perches.
Yeah.
And it makes it feel lived in. It makes it feel settled in. So you immediately have a sense of immersion in the story. And a comfort with the characters in their natural habitat. And it's really effective.
And then it contrasts so heavily when we're introduced to Netherfield. We're not brought in this like slow pan. We're instead like introduced like, boom, we're inside this glorious dining room. Boom, we're inside this beautiful bedroom. Boom, we're inside this sitting room. And it feels very like no one's sitting back in the couch except Mr. Bingley, because he's a very relaxed, down-to-earth character. He's like slouching back in the couch, but like Lizzie's sitting up straight, barely using the back of the couch. Mr. Darcy's sitting at the desk all elegantly. Caroline's just walking around like a psycho. Like it contrasts so heavily with the Bennets. And then of course Pemberley contrasts again. We're brought in and introduced, but in this like grand, beautiful way. In this like Lizzie could find herself living here the way she lives at the Bennett's house versus Netherfield, which is so like inaccessible to her.
Yeah, it speaks to an overwhelming understanding of the text. The guy who played Pycelle, I think was his name in Game of Thrones. The actor is Anton Lesser.
Okay.
He did an audiobook performance of Charles Dickens' Hard Times.
Oh, cool.
That I listened to when I had to read that book in college. And versus just looking at the page and your brain working through the words, when someone understands the story so well, they can inflect and add layers and nuance and sort of spice to the story so that you get it more, so that you feel the characters' passions more, you feel their motivations almost, and you develop the narration better. And this movie has that same like overwhelming understanding of the source material. Because even having those long tracking shots of Lizzie's house speaks to Lizzie's kind of laid back confidence versus the harsh cuts of Darcy's house when he's like pulled back and reserved and uncomfortable. So there are so many levels of commentary even in these small technical decisions that it all comes together to be this ethereal perfect translation, even if you can't point to why. It's it's the definition of firing on all cylinders.
100%.
Because everyone's doing their job and everyone understands this one interpretation. Because I guess that is ultimately the job of the director, is to pull everyone in the same direction. And I definitely feel like he did his job here.
I totally agree. What? I'm sorry. There's a lot of noise.
So weird. They're doing construction next to us, on an apartment building next to us. But I have a point about Matthew McFadden.
Okay.
If you want to do that for a second.
Sure.
We've only talked about Darcy a little bit.
Okay.
He, of course, he plays Darcy, and as we talked about before, he plays Tom in Succession. And I love both of those characters. I love the performances. I really like watching the actor. And I was trying to sort of split the difference and see the similarities and differences between those two.
Sure.
There are notes of Tom throughout the Darcy performance. And the thing I zeroed in on was the clipped cruelty. That's what I called it in my notes. But maybe more often and more striking than that is a shared tragic vulnerability in these two characters. Because when you just look at them for the first time, I mean, Tom isn't really the protagonist, I guess. He's not the number one main character of Succession, but he's up there.
Yeah, yeah.
Both of these characters are tall, strong, dark and handsome, kind of well-dressed millionaires.
Yes.
But neither one is Bruce Wayne.
No.
And I think that became an archetype maybe around 2005, where every rom-com would have the tall, dark, and handsome millionaire.
Yes.
And he would be the male lead. In most movies, I feel like that was the thing.
Yeah.
Even the Christopher Nolan Batman movies, like that Bruce Wayne thing that I'm talking about.
Okay.
That is the Matthew McFadyen look. But he never plays that.
Yeah.
And that becomes the tragedy of all of these characters.
Yes.
That instead, they're defined by their strained, complex relationships, usually with the women around them.
Yes.
They have no real family of their own, or barely any family.
That's true. Yeah. All Darcy has is his sister, and Tom has seemingly nobody.
And they have kind of uncertain, plateaued futures.
Yes.
Which, now that I think of it, a lot of those qualities do apply to Bruce Wayne.
Well, okay.
And Bingley is sort of Greg. If you look at it that way, they're both like the wholesome friends.
Yeah,
of those two
except
characters.
Darcy doesn't like completely manipulate Mr. Bingley.
And that's
he
the
does
thing.
a little bit,
Yeah.
but not nearly.
That's the main difference between these characters.
Yes.
Tom is cutting and cruel, but above all else, he's a grasping control freak.
Yes.
And if he's a villain, he's a petty villain.
Oh,
and the
yeah.
only person he can ever really dominate is Greg,
Yes.
who is the lowest on the totem
And that's
pole.
why he dominates him so aggressively, is because he can't do it to
Right.
anybody else. He can barely control his life with his own wife.
But all Darcy is grasping.
Yes.
He doesn't have the control freak manipulative part of him.
Right.
He's just terrified, distant, aloof, uncomfortable.
and cares really deeply about like three
Yes.
people.
Right.
Yeah.
Tom doesn't care. He notices and resents, but care is not really one of the feelings there.
Yeah.
Darcy doesn't have the wherewithal to be hateful and controlling,
No.
which is all Tom is. All Tom is resentful, and Darcy,
Yeah.
like you said, is fundamentally caring and sad.
But he's also a snob. And that's what makes him mean. And that he appears to be mean, is that he's snobbish and doesn't do well if there's not a good first impression.
But he seizes up mostly. Like, the only thing Tom's good at is banter. And Darcy bats away jokes or banter like they're a disease.
Yeah, like he's very clever and he can argue, but he doesn't usually choose to because it makes him uncomfortable.
But I love the boldness of Darcy being more of a lead character than Tom is, but Matthew McFadyen playing him weaker, more vulnerable, more scared.
Totally, yeah.
I mean, more like emotionally weak and
Yes.
stunted. And I read I just remembered this, I read a great interview with him a couple months ago as Succession was wrapping up.
Yeah.
And he was saying, he was talking more about the British theater and film world.
Yeah.
He was saying he knows a lot of actors who have like lead roles. The interviewer was saying, why aren't you the lead in more projects? He was saying, because I choose the good projects. And it basically, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but basically he said, I'd rather be a smaller role in a better project.
Nice. That's
And
great.
that he knows people who are leads in huge blockbuster movies and things who are miserable.
Yeah.
And him choosing this beefy character actor sort of role in Succession, I mean, you can tell he's having more fun.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I'm
But
very happy
even
for him.
when he was in this like tall, dark, and handsome protagonist lead actor role, he played it like a side character
Yeah, absolutely.
with that depth and sort of lack of a huge American Tom Cruise-y over-the-top swagger.
Yes, because he's uncomfortable with his social standing. I mean, obviously, no one's going to not want to be wealthy, but he's uncomfortable with how high in society he is, and it means he has to interact so much. Whereas Mr. Bingley, who's like a step below him, but still very wealthy, is like super friendly, super like, I'll talk to anybody. He's a golden retriever. Like, that's what he is.
Yeah.
And Darcy is like so not that, and so he's so uncomfortable with his position.
But I think the secret is that just off-center supporting role is way more engaging and lovable than that stereotype lead man.
Sure.
Which is also, I think, why Brad Pitt finally won an Oscar for supporting actor.
Oh, and Once Upon a Time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that role was just off kilter
Yeah. Uh-huh.
and was fatally flawed, but grasping.
Yeah.
It didn't have that easy confidence.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just...
That makes a lot of sense.
I really appreciated his performance
Totally.
this time. I think because I've seen so much more of his acting now after 3 seasons of Succession.
Me too. I was like looking at it and being like, it's amazing that, I mean, that's just what being a good actor is, but it's amazing that this same person can be Tom and can also be Mr. Darcy.
And bring so much nuance and complexity and tragedy to both roles. He was really a standout to me this time.
They both feel like real people. Again, they're both good, well-written characters. They're not these archetypes, and he plays that really well. The last question that you asked me, well, you asked me too. I'll do this one. It's quick. You asked me, is there anything I get tired of? Because like when you rewatch a movie 1,000 times, there's always a part that drags.
Unless it's Goodfellas. Every movie has that little Achilles heel you resent.
And I said, honestly, really, no. Like,
Sure.
I guess like if I had to like gun to my head, when they go to visit Lady Catherine at Rosings, that's kind of boring because I find like Lady Catherine is a great character, and Judi Dench, Christ, is obviously doing a good job.
Yeah.
But when you've seen Lady Catherine be a snobby bitch 40 times, it's like, okay, I'm just annoyed at this point.
It's a little, yeah, sure.
And it just kind of drags, even though like Mr. Darcy's there and like that's what leads to the proposal or whatever. That kind of drags. But honestly, that's like minor because I think because like you said, like this movie is quick, there are lots of different things happening. It doesn't really drag ever, even though it's not necessarily, I wouldn't call it a fast-paced movie, but they're just a lot of quick scenes. I think it doesn't really drag for me, and it's the perfect length, and the music's beautiful, and it doesn't matter, it carries me through. But the last like actual question that I had to answer from you was, did this ruin all other Jane Austen adaptations for you? And I say yes and no. Sorry. Yes, because there's never going to be another one like this. And I know that. Like films, even like in the last 16 years since this was made, films have changed so much. I don't think they'll ever make another movie quite of this style ever again, just because it's old and tired and we want more interest and, I don't know, complexity.
It's also one of those perfect mid-range movies.
Yeah.
Where it's not a $1 million indie and it's not a $400 million superhero movie.
Right, and that's a whole other discussion about the film industry.
And there are very few of those middle-of-the-road movies getting made.
Right, that's not really happening anymore. So there is that.
But those are the things you and I love.
Yes. So, but the thing is, like, I hold this on such different tier that it doesn't ruin it for me, because I'm still always so excited to see other adaptations. And again, the 2020 Emma was beautiful. I think it was a wonderful adaptation. I still think Pride and Prejudice is better. I'm always going to think that. But I still really liked that adaptation. I had a delightful time.
I loved that movie.
I absolutely loved it.
It's so good.
Yes.
And it
was
nods
wonderful.
to this.
It totally
There are
does.
some little beats of the story. Like, the really romantic dance.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, the dance is so
and
good.
the sort of repressed feelings as they're falling in love with each other. Just little, like, hand motions that show you that they're, like, passionately in love with this person that they can't say anything to yet.
And even the 1995 Sense and Sensibility, I think is a wonderful. You saw that for the first time last year.
Yep,
I made you watch it. Strapped you down.
It's fantastic.
That's also a beautiful movie.
Not nearly as good as this.
No, but it's like, but I still love it. I also just don't think it's as good a story. So there's that.
Right.
I mean, I like Sense and Sensibility, but I think Pride and Prejudice is just a better story. And then I know they're working on, I think, like 2 different, I'm unsure, Persuasion movies, which I'm really excited to see.
One of which has one of the other actors from Succession, Sarah Snook.
Oh, yeah. So I don't know what the timeline is or who's really involved, but Persuasion is in the mix, which is great, because Persuasion is, I think, one of my favorite books of hers.
Oh, okay.
It's the last one she wrote, and her heroine is 28, which is old for Jane Austen times. And it's a really different kind of story than the rest of her books.
How old are you?
I will not say. But so there's that. And then I also wanted to mention another adaptation, which is the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, which was, it's a web series, and it's a modern adaptation of Jane Austen. And it's on YouTube, and it's a series of 100 5-minute videos. And it is basically like Lizzie Bennet is like this grad student who's like making YouTube videos, and it follows her life. And they cut out some characters, like instead of 5 sisters, it's 3, because Mary and Kitty don't matter, so they're not really in it. They barely matter in the book. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Which one's the piano one?
Mary.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, Mary and Kitty are named in this adaptation. They're just different characters. They're not sisters.
Yeah.
And I will say, it is very 2012, like, because there's so much internet like humor and
epic fail.
Not even that. There's a lot of internet like lingo because it's about her making, it's very meta, so it's like about her making these videos, and so it's like, think about what YouTube was like in 2012. That's what these videos are like. So if you just kind of accept that and watch it, I think it's really, really good. It's certainly the best modern adaptation I've seen of this story. I've watched it probably 3 or 4 times. It's really addicting to watch because it's 5-minute videos, so you end up watching 10 in a row.
But there is a plague of remakes of this story and
totally.
Modern adaptations.
A lot of
and
it's
updates.
absolute shit. Like they made one, it was, there's Pride and Prejudice and zombies, which is like, oh, what? No, I don't care. And
there's a book of it, like I feel like it's about once a month there's one that's all about cafes, and
somehow it's always YA. I don't know why.
I know,
but it is. And like, just so there's a lot of bad adaptations of this stuff too. But if you want a good modern adaptation in a totally different format, the Lizzie Bennet Diaries is actually really fun, and it's obviously it's free. It's on YouTube, so go watch
much
that.
Like Shakespeare, I never want to see a modern version.
Really? I like modern Shakespeare. Like, what do you mean?
No, I like it to be vaguely old-timey or kind of militaristic.
No, I like it.
Not like togas and sandals. I hate that version.
Yeah.
Or I don't really like the faithful to the original version either. I just like kind of surreal old-timey. Like the new Macbeth is sort of
but I feel like Shakespeare is different. With Jane Austen, you have to set it because place is so important. You have to set it in a real place with real, like in a real context. So I think it's a really great adaptation. So no, I'm always going to be excited to see more Jane Austen stuff. And I'll always be critical because like there are some that are just shit, and that's fine. But
same with Shakespeare.
But I also know that nothing will ever be Pride and Prejudice 2005, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. So anyway,
and that's why we covered that one, and not the other ones.
Yeah, not the other ones.
Great.
But the miniseries is good. It's just really different than the movie.
I have no interest.
All right, it's only 6 hours long. I don't know what. I gotta say, I am so impressed with my English teacher because she watched that series every year with her students, and she watched it 6 times a day with her different classes. So she watched that series like a collective 5 million times. So like, good on you, Mrs. Dupree.
Yeah.
She was a great teacher. I loved her. Anyway, so that's all I have.
Awesome movie.
This is the greatest movie of all time. I'm not gonna disagree, or I'm not gonna back down on that. But
So
watch
maybe
this
we'll
movie sorry. What? What? I just wanted to say, so much of film and movies now is like dramatic, horrible things happening, and it's horrible people and horrible families and tragedy, which I love, and that's great. But if you just want a nice feel good without it being a Hallmark Christmas movie, it's actually good, go watch this because it's great. And don't watch Bridgerton because it's trash. Okay.
Yeah. So what do you think of this movie? Have you seen it? secondbreakfastpod@gmail.com or on Instagram at secondbreakfastpod. Let us know, and maybe we'll cover some more of our favorites.